So we have finished exercise 1. We have met the requirements. We've composited 5 different line art elements together, 5 or more, and we have posted them into the assignment, and we've sized it to all show up and look good with our name, right? Because skills don't stop just with the requirements, I'm going to show you my bonus finishing extra. So we can now replace those black pixels that we combined all into one place, even though we still have a group that has our individual layers here if we ever wanted to modify those. But now that we have our black pixels isolated and all together, I can replace those black pixels with anything I want. I think of it like cutting something out of wrapping paper. And when you look at the professional examples here, I talked about Arturo Herrera's work with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This piece I actually got to see in the late 90s at the Armory Museum in LA. And it's actually about 12 feet tall. And everything you see there is cut out of felt, right? So it's colored, multicolored, kind of tie-dyed felt that then those lines are cut out of. I haven't seen Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs feature film in a while, but I don't think their line art is made of tie-dye, right? It's just black lines. So what he has done is he's replaced those black lines with something a lot more interesting. So how can we do that digitally? Well, we start by doing another image search. And I'm just going to go right to Google Images, because this isn't for actual line art. This is just for color and texture. And I'm going to look up tie-dye felt. And I'm going to change those tools to make sure it is large. And I'm going to find an image that is just interesting. Interesting colors and textures, maybe like this. You can do it with anything you want, right? You can look up comic book pages. This is kind of interesting, this felt rug. But I want it to be a fairly high resolution. Don't get fooled by the suggestions, because though they are similar, to the image, they are not at the high resolution that you want. So always pay attention to pixel dimensions. I'm going to open that image up in a new tab, just like we were learning last class. I'm going to make sure it looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. I am going to save it onto my desktop and then maybe move it into my folder. But I want to have easy access to it. Now I go back to Photoshop. And just like if this was line art, I'm going to drop this in. Now, because I was selecting on a lower layer, it puts it in above that layer that I had selected, but underneath my actual layer. I want to move it on top of everything. So your layers are like stacks of paper. You can move them around, move it on top. Then, before I rasterize it, I'm going to do Command-T or free transform, and I'm going to hold down Shift, and I am going to stretch it like cookie dough, or like the hardest part of wrapping a gift for me is figuring out how big a piece of wrapping paper I need for the gift. I need this to be stretched out enough to cover my line art. And it looks really pixelated here just because I'm in the transform setting. As soon as I hit return, it will go back to original pixel dimensions. All right? And if I'm at all unsure if it covers, I can always switch it to multiply mode to see. And it looks like that will cover all of my lines, like enough wrapping paper. Okay, next, this is the cool part. This is all to teach one thing that we'll be using a lot later. Selections in Photoshop move between layers. That's not something we've done before. So what do I mean? We've used the magic wand. I'm going to use the magic wand to select the empty space with contiguous turned off. Why? Because the computer is very good at knowing where there are no pixels, right? It's not always so good at identifying a dark gray pixel from a black pixel, right? But empty space, it's really good at identifying. So that selects all the empty space. Then I'm going to say select inverse so that it swaps it. So now even if the pixels aren't exactly black, which they should be, but even if they're not, it's selecting all of them. But this is the cool thing. If I turn the eyeball off, that selection is still there. And if I treat that selection as a cookie cutter, I can now click on this layer of my background texture. And I can use that selection to cut out the line art from that color and texture. And how do I do that? With a 2-key shortcut for duplicate, right? Because it will make a stamp of everything that's selected and put it onto a new layer. So Command J. And now if I turn off that layer behind, now it will help to turn on the white so you can see it. Now all those lines are filled with that texture and color from this photograph. Now it doesn't stop there, right? Though I think that's pretty interesting. Maybe there are some areas that feel a little too light, and I can play with levels and I can darken them. But what I can also do is I can composite with these background textures. So not just take one wrapping paper, but blend multiples together. So take this image, open it, image in a new tab, drag it to the desktop, bring it into my folder so that I can easily bring it into, as long as I'm not in full screen mode, into Photoshop immediately, because I'm not even rasterizing these layers, right? I'm just scaling them up, stretching them, right-clicking and warping them, because I'm not deleting anything from them. I don't need to rasterize them, so that gives them the best pixel quality possible. I'm going to stretch that out, and then I'm going to do the same thing. And I can go from either this layer, and I can select all the empty space with the magic wand with contiguous turned off. Well, got to be on the right layer, right? And then I say select inverse, so now it's selecting all the actual lines. And then I click on this background, and then I hit Command J to duplicate from those lines. And now, if I want to blend those two together, I can use blending modes like multiply, or some of these other blending modes, which you might like, which are just ways of letting some pixels through and other pixels not, right? We'll be using them a lot more later. Or I can just leave it on normal and just play with its opacity. So let one fade into the other. And decide how much I want of one, how much I want of the other. And I think that's pretty nice. Make sense? I can also rasterize it by making a duplicate it's already rasterized, and I can just delete it in areas where I don't want any of that top layer, right? Or if I want black to show through, I can delete it from both and have the black line art showing. So many options. But I'm liking this okay. So now how do I turn this one in? I'm going to turn off the background, so I have the option as a PNG. And I'm going to say File, Save a Copy. If you're doing it out of Photopea, you say File, Export As, and you'll be able to export it as a JPEG or a PNG. And I'm going to change this to a PNG so that it is free-floating. And I'm going to change the name, right? Because I don't want to overwrite what's already there. So I'm going to call it color at the end. But I don't overwrite that PNG tag. And now when I save that, and I check my folder, there it is. I'm going to mark that as orange. Orange means that it can go to Canvas. But the requirement is to post it in black. So the extra is you'll add to your original post if you want to add your color version. So I'm going to edit it. And that shows me that you're interested in really understanding how to make the most out of kind of selection tools and customizing. Not just using other people's pixels, but then really doing something with them, right? And this, I'll just tell you from experience, this creates a much more interesting artwork print than just black pixels. And it's like making a logo for your client that's black, so it's ultimately versatile, and then doing a color version for them. All right. That is our optional finishing technique.